The rain hit the windshield like tiny drums and I slammed the brakes when I saw him standing there, in the middle of the street, as if waiting just for me, my heart skipping in a way it hadn't in years, because I recognized that smile immediately, the one that had haunted my dreams and memories since the day he disappeared from my life, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even think. All I knew was that he was there, soaked in the rain, looking exactly the same but older, more serious, and carrying that familiar look that made my stomach twist with hope and fear all at once. And then I realized the car behind me had stopped too, horns blaring, people shouting, and I jumped out before I even thought, calling his name, and he turned slowly, his eyes locking with mine, the ones that had once promised forever and then vanished without warning, and I wanted to run, to scream, to throw myself into his arms, but my feet felt like stone, rooted in the wet asphalt. Watching him lift his hand in a wave that was both casual and deliberate, and I felt tears sting my eyes because it was him, really him, standing there like a ghost I had been chasing for years. And then my phone buzzed and I pulled it out, hands trembling, and saw a message from my son, telling me he had lost his bag somewhere on our trip, and I realized I hadn't even packed properly, that we were late for the hotel we had booked, and I felt a rush of panic mix with this unbearable longing. Because seeing him here now felt impossible and right all at once, and I didn't know what to do. Should I run to him or go back to my son waiting in the car? And then he started walking toward me, slow but steady, and my heart raced so fast I thought it might burst, and I remembered how we had met years ago at a bookstore, how our hands had brushed over the same book, and how we had laughed about it until we forgot the time, and then the world had shifted, and he had gone away, leaving me with only memories and letters that never arrived. And now he was here, real, tangible, and I wanted to reach out, but the hotel was calling, the trip was urgent, my son needed me, and I felt torn in a way I had never felt before, like two halves of my heart were being pulled in opposite directions, and I saw him stop a few feet from me, rain dripping from his hair, and he smiled that same familiar smile that made everything feel like a dream, and then he said my name, my full name, in a voice that sounded almost like it belonged to someone else, someone I had forgotten but never really lost. And I shivered because hearing it made everything from the past flood back, the laughter, the late-night talks, the plans we had made, and the promises we had broken, and I wanted to tell him to stay, to come with me, to not disappear again, but before I could speak, a taxi screeched around the corner, splashing water up my legs, and my son's voice called from the car, panicked, saying we had to go now or we'd miss our reservation, and I looked back at him, at the man who had once been my everything, and I felt the pull in my chest like it was physical, dragging me toward him, toward the life I had almost forgotten, and he took a step forward, then stopped as if unsure, and I realized he was waiting for me to make a choice, waiting to see if I would leave everything behind or go back to what I knew, and I swallowed hard because I couldn't decide fast enough, couldn't stop time, couldn't figure out how to fit both worlds into this one moment, and then the rain came harder, soaking us both, the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement, and I saw him reach into his coat pocket and pull out an envelope, old, worn and familiar, the kind I had seen before but never thought I would touch again, and my hand shook as he held it out to me, the paper trembling slightly in the wind, and I knew, before I even opened it, that whatever was inside would change everything, that it wasn't just a letter, it wasn't just words, it was a decision, a past resurfacing, and my stomach churned because I didn't know if I was ready, didn't know if I could handle the truth, didn't know if I could face the memories that came rushing back with his eyes and his voice and his presence. And then he whispered something under his breath, something I couldn't quite hear, but it felt like a promise and a warning at the same time, and I took a step closer, still holding the envelope between us, and the rain blurred our vision, blurred the line between past and present, and my son honked again from the car, impatient, urging me back to reality, to safety, to what I had promised him, and I looked at my child, who was waiting in the car, his small face pressed against the window, and I felt my heart split, one half wanting to run into the rain toward the man I had never stopped loving, the other half wanting to keep my promise, to stay, to protect, to be the parent I had always wanted to be. And in that moment time felt suspended, and the city noises faded, and it was just him and me and the envelope between us, and I realized that whatever was in it could undo years, could reopen wounds, could give me the chance I had waited for. And then I felt a hand on my shoulder, small and insistent, and I turned to see my son staring up at me, eyes wide and worried, asking me silently to choose, and I swallowed hard, looking back at the man in the rain, at the envelope, and at the small boy holding on to me for safety, and I knew the next second would decide everything. And then he spoke again, louder this time, calling my name across the street, and my heart froze because the words he said were the same as a memory I hadn't touched in years, the ones that had haunted my nights, and before I could answer, the envelope slipped from his hand, fluttered to the wet pavement, and I saw the edge bend as it soaked in the rain, and I lunged forward instinctively, heart in my throat, trying to catch it, and at that precise moment, a car door slammed in the background, a horn blared, and I realized I was about to make a choice I couldn't undo, and the twist hit me like lightning, because the envelope wasn't just from him, it wasn't just words, it was something bigger, something I had never expected, and I knew the second I touched it that my life, my son's life, and the path I thought I was on were all about to change forever, and there was no turning back. As I crouched in the rain, trying to salvage the envelope, my mind exploded with memories of how we had first met years ago at a small coffee shop on a rainy afternoon much like this one. I had been fumbling with my umbrella when he appeared, holding his own over my head without asking, and I had stared at him, startled and grateful, and he had smiled, that same smile that made me melt then and now, and he had said, "Looks like you need a hand," in a voice that was warm and gentle, and from that moment, the world seemed to slow down just for us, as we shared a table because the shop was crowded, and we talked about books, music, and silly little dreams, and it felt like we had known each other forever, like our souls had brushed before our bodies ever met, and I remembered laughing until my cheeks hurt as he recounted a story about spilling coffee on a stranger, and he remembered every detail of the awkward moment like it had been a treasure, and I had felt this pull, this connection that I couldn't explain, and from that day on, our bond grew in quiet ways like shared coffee runs, late-night phone calls, and whispered jokes that only we understood, and we discovered small rituals that made life brighter, from leaving notes on each other's desks to surprising one another with tiny gifts, and even simple walks felt like adventures, because every moment with him held a kind of magic, a rhythm I didn't know existed until he entered my life, and my chest tightened with the memory of our first real confession, when we sat on the park bench under a blanket of stars and he admitted he had never felt this way about anyone before, and I told him the same thing, our words floating between us, fragile and exhilarating, sealing a promise we thought would never break, yet life, as it often does, intervened in a way we hadn't anticipated, because shortly after that night, he received an unexpected job offer in another city, one that was too good to refuse, and I had encouraged him to go, because love, I thought, meant wanting the best for the other person even if it hurt, and for a while we wrote letters, exchanged messages, and counted days, until we could see each other again, but distance, responsibilities, and a series of missed calls and misread messages created a silence that neither of us knew how to fill, and eventually, I stopped hearing from him, the letters dried up, the phone calls went unanswered, and I was left with a void I tried to ignore, convincing myself it was life, not choice, that had separated us, while he, I imagined, must have felt the same pull, the same ache, and I clung to every memory, every photograph, every small token we had exchanged as if holding them could stitch back the bond that had once felt unbreakable. And now, standing in the rain, the envelope in my hands, I realized it was all coming back at once, every laugh, every whisper, every shared secret, and I noticed a familiar handwriting on the front that I hadn't seen in years, trembling slightly in the wet, and when I opened it, the paper was soaked but readable, and inside was a note that began with words I would never forget, words that made my heart stop. I never left because I wanted to, I left because I thought it was the only way to protect you, and my mind spun because all this time, I had believed it was distance, silence, and maybe even anger that separated us, but suddenly the reason was completely different. It wasn't what I had imagined, it was something deeper, something hidden that I hadn't known about, and the revelation made the air around me feel heavier, more urgent, as if the rain itself were waiting for me to understand. And then I remembered a specific day years ago, when he had hesitated before leaving the coffee shop, eyes darting as if he were keeping a secret, and I had thought it was nerves or shyness, but now with this note in my hands, I realized it had been the beginning of the lie he carried, the burden he had borne silently to protect me, and suddenly all the missed messages, the empty months, the quiet absence, it all made a painful, beautiful kind of sense, and I felt tears sting my eyes as I held the envelope tighter, realizing the man in the rain wasn't just a ghost from my past. He was someone who had loved me fiercely, someone who had chosen to endure his own pain so I wouldn't have to, and the weight of that truth collided with the sound of my son calling from the car, tugging me back to the present, and I knew I had to make a choice, but before I could even move, the man in the rain spoke again, voice trembling now, a mix of hope and fear, and he said something that made my knees weaken. There's something else you need to know, something I didn't say because I didn't know how, but it changes everything. And the words hit me like a storm because everything I thought I knew about the past, about why we were apart, about who we were, was about to be rewritten. And as the rain poured around us, mixing with the memories and the revelations, I realized that this reunion, this encounter, was not just about catching up or reopening old wounds, it was about uncovering a hidden truth that could reshape our entire story. And in that split second, I knew life would never feel the same again, and the envelope in my hand suddenly felt heavier, charged with the power of secrets finally surfacing, secrets that would force me to see him, and us, in an entirely new light. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle when I finally stepped closer, the envelope clutched tightly in my hands, and he looked at me as if seeing me for the first time and for the 1000th time all at once, his eyes reflecting the streetlights and the storm of emotions between us, and I couldn't breathe for a moment because every memory, every lost year, every smile and tear we had shared came rushing back, and I heard myself whisper his name, unsure if it was relief or fear or both, and he responded immediately, voice low but steady. I thought I'd never see you again. And the word struck me with a mix of warmth and sorrow because I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, rehearsed it in my mind, but reality felt sharper, more intense, more fragile, and I searched his face for signs, any hint of why he had vanished, why the letters had stopped, why the silence had lasted so long, and he seemed to sense my questions without me speaking them because he said, "It wasn't easy leaving, I never wanted to go, but I thought I had no choice," and the honesty in his voice made my chest ache and my hands shake, and I wanted to step forward and close the gap, to reach for him, to grab hold of the years we had lost, but something held me back, the small, insistent tug of responsibility for my son, waiting in the car, reminding me of the life I couldn't leave entirely behind, and I realized how much had changed, how much had stayed the same, how even after all these years, the connection between us pulsed with the same energy as the day we had first met, and I found myself laughing nervously, shaking my head as I remembered the first time he had held an umbrella over me, how awkward and kind and unintentional it had been, and he smiled, that same familiar curve of his lips that had haunted my dreams, and said, "I remember thinking I didn't want to let you go that day," and my heart stuttered at the confession, because it mirrored everything I had felt but never dared to voice, and we fell into a strange rhythm of words, short sentences, questions and half-answers, memories spilling into the present like water into a cracked vase, and I told him about my son, about the small moments we had shared during these years, and he listened intently, nodding, eyes softening, voice gentle, asking questions as if trying to understand the world I had built without him, and I realized then how much I had wanted him to see it, to know my life, and he said, "I always wondered what you were doing, how you were, if you were happy," and the words hit me harder than any absence had, because in his silence he had carried worry and care, a quiet love that had never truly faded, and I remembered our first long walk together, under autumn leaves and city lights, laughing at nothing, discovering each other in ways words could barely capture, and I told him how I had imagined him often, how I had rehearsed meetings in my head, hoping one day reality would match the dream, and he nodded, and I saw a flicker of pain cross his face, a shadow I hadn't noticed before, and I asked him why he had stopped writing, why he had vanished, and he hesitated, swallowing hard, eyes glancing away, fingers tightening on his coat, and he admitted, "I thought staying away would protect you, and I thought it was the right choice, but I was wrong," and my chest tightened, a mix of relief and sorrow, because the truth was heavier and more delicate than I had expected, and I remembered the way he had laughed under the coffee shop lights, how easy it had felt to trust him, and now that trust returned in waves, trembling and fragile but real, and I realized how much I had missed him, not just the man, but the way he had made me feel alive, seen and understood, and he stepped closer, and I felt the pull, the magnetic tug of all those years of memory, and I wanted to tell him everything, confess the nights I had spent thinking of him, the moments I had almost reached for the phone to call, almost written his name in letters I never sent, but before I could speak he said softly, "There's something else I never told you," and my heart stopped, every nerve alert, because the words carried weight, the kind of weight that could shift everything, and I asked him to tell me, voice shaking despite myself, and he looked down at the envelope in my hand, a small, sad smile on his lips, and whispered, "It's not just why I left, it's why I couldn't come back sooner," and my stomach churned with anticipation, the past, the present, and the unknown colliding, and I realized that whatever secret he was holding could change the way I understood our entire story, and I felt tears prickle in my eyes, not just from relief or sadness, but from the raw intensity of this moment, the mixture of fear, hope, and longing, and I wanted to hold him, to anchor him, to tell him that it was okay, that we could rebuild. But the city noises and the faint sound of my son calling from the car reminded me that life still moved forward, and I had to choose carefully because every step, every word, every glance could change everything again. And as he reached for the envelope, eyes locking with mine, I realized the story I thought I knew was only half the truth, and the moment hung between us like fragile glass shimmering with possibilities, and I understood that this reunion wasn't just a chance meeting in the rain. It was the beginning of a reckoning, a reconnection that demanded courage, honesty, and a willingness to face the years we had lost. And just as the drizzle lightened and the wet pavement reflected the streetlights, he said, quietly but with intensity, "I need you to see everything, all of it, before you decide what we can be." And my heart pounded because I knew that whatever I was about to discover would define the rest of our story. And in that suspended second, with rain dripping down both our faces, I understood that nothing would ever be simple again, and the choice I was about to make could either pull us together or leave us broken, suspended on the edge of a truth that neither of us had faced fully. And I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I had to try. The rain had stopped, leaving the street glistening under the streetlights, and we stood there, soaked and trembling, as if the years between us had condensed into this one moment. And I finally found the courage to ask the question that had haunted me every day. "Why did you really leave?" And he swallowed, eyes dark with memory and regret, and for a moment the silence was unbearable, the city sounds fading into the background, until he said slowly, "It wasn't about you, it was about me, about the life I thought I had to lead, and the mistakes I made that I couldn't fix while I was with you." And my chest tightened because the words were both an explanation and an apology, and I asked him to tell me everything, every detail, every choice, every moment that led him away from me, and he nodded, voice low, carrying the weight of years. "I got an opportunity, a chance I couldn't turn down, and I thought I could do it alone, protect you from the chaos, and I wanted to make sure when I came back, I could be the person you deserved, but I misjudged everything, the timing, the distance, how silence could hurt more than words." And I felt tears sting my eyes, relief and sorrow colliding, because the silence I had blamed on him was really a shield, a way to protect me from pain he carried alone. And I realized how many nights I had cried over him, over us, over something I didn't fully understand. And he reached out, his hand hovering near mine, hesitant, and I could see the longing in his eyes, the love that had never faded. And I said softly, "Why didn't you write, call, anything? I waited every day, hoping to hear from you." And he shook his head, regret etched in every line of his face. "I tried, I really did, but every message I drafted, every letter I wanted to send, I couldn't bring myself to put it into words that wouldn't hurt you more. And I thought if I stayed silent, at least you'd have peace. And I see now I was wrong. I see now that silence only tore us apart." And I felt my heart break and mend in the same instant, understanding the truth, feeling the love that had never left. And he said, "I know you have your life, your son, everything I stepped away from, and I don't expect things to go back to how they were. But I needed you to know why, needed you to understand that it was never about leaving you behind." And I stepped closer, our hands brushing, the rain still dripping from our coats, and I whispered, "I never stopped loving you, even when I thought I should, even when I was angry, even when I didn't understand." And he looked at me, eyes shining, voice barely audible. "And I never stopped loving you, not for a single day, and every choice I made, even the hardest, I made hoping one day you'd forgive me." And the honesty between us was raw, real, and fragile, and I remembered the long walks, the laughter, the late-night talks, the small moments that had built the foundation of everything, and I realized how much I had missed him, how empty life had felt without him. And he asked softly, "Can we try, even just a little, even if it's complicated?" And I swallowed, looking past him to the car where my son waited, realizing that trying meant risking heartbreak again, yet not trying felt impossible. And I said, voice shaking, "I don't know if I can, but I want to see if we can find what we lost." And he smiled faintly, hope flickering in his eyes, the kind of hope that felt like sunrise after a storm. And then he took a breath and his face grew serious. "There's one more thing, something I never told anyone, something that could change everything you think about us." And I froze, heart pounding, hands trembling, because the weight in his voice told me it wasn't just a detail, it was something monumental, a truth that could redefine our past. And he said, "Before I left, I made a choice, a promise I couldn't break, And it wasn't just about protecting you, it was about protecting someone else too. And my mind raced because the words were vague but heavy, and I felt the world tilt as I asked, barely able to speak. Someone else? And he nodded, eyes full of pain and fear and love all at once. Yes, someone I couldn't put in danger by being with you. Someone who needed me to step away even if it broke my heart. And my chest constricted, trying to imagine what that could mean, who it could be, and I realized that everything I thought I understood about our separation was about to be rewritten, and I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, to know everything immediately. But the way he looked at me stopped me, as if he needed me to understand the depth of the choice he had made. And in that moment I realized the reunion, the rain, the envelope, and all the years of longing had led to this precise instant. A moment where love, truth, and fear collided. And I knew that whatever I decided next, whether to step forward or step back, to forgive or hesitate, would change the rest of our lives. And as he held out his hand, the envelope still between us, and my heart beat faster than ever, I understood that the story of us was no longer just about past love. It was about courage, about facing the unknown, about whether we could accept the truth fully and still find a way to be together. And I hesitated, caught between hope and fear, past and present, love and the weight of hidden choices, and the rain-slicked street around us felt like the edge of the world, because whatever I chose in the next second would define everything, and I realized with a trembling certainty that nothing would ever feel the same again. And the final words he spoke, quiet but heavy, hung in the air. You need to know everything before you decide, because once you do, there's no turning back. And I stared at him, heart in my throat, gripping the envelope, knowing that the next moment would change our story forever. That I stared at him, heart hammering, as the weight of his words settled over me like the quiet after a storm. And finally, with trembling hands, I reached for the envelope, opening it slowly to reveal a series of letters, each carefully written and dated, all the messages he had drafted over the years but never sent, and my chest tightened because in them, I could see the depth of his love, the longing he had carried, the careful thought behind every word, and tears blurred my vision as I realized that everything he had done, every painful choice, every moment of silence, had been guided by a love that had never faded. And he reached out, hand brushing mine, his touch electric and grounding at the same time, and he said softly, I wanted you to know that no matter what, I loved you and I still do. And I could hear the sincerity, the ache, the hope in his voice, and I felt my own heart open fully, remembering the laughter, the walks, the small moments that had built the foundation of us. And I whispered, voice shaking, I never stopped either, even when I was angry, even when I thought I had to move on, even when I felt abandoned, I never stopped. And we stood there, hands intertwined, rain still dripping from our coats, the city around us moving but somehow paused, as if time had given us this moment to breathe and understand. And he smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and wonder, and said, then maybe we can start again, even if carefully, even if slowly, but together. And I nodded, tears falling freely now, knowing that forgiveness was not just letting go of the past, but embracing the possibility of a future. And I thought of my son waiting in the car, our small family, the life that had continued while we were apart, and I realized that love did not erase years, but it could build bridges over them. And I said softly, we will find a way, we always do. And he pulled me into a gentle embrace, long and grounding, and I felt the tension, the sorrow, and the longing dissolve into something warmer, something full of hope. And then I noticed a small paper tucked inside the envelope, folded carefully, with a familiar handwriting, and I opened it to find a message meant just for me, a final gesture saying simply, even when we are apart, you are in my heart. And the words struck me with a peaceful clarity, as if the years of separation, the misunderstandings, the silences, had all been part of a journey that led us here, to honesty, to presence, to the possibility of a life rebuilt with love. And he looked down at me with the same intensity as the first day we had met, and I realized that the same bond that had connected us in a coffee shop so many years ago had never truly been broken, only stretched, tested, and made stronger by time. And I thought about the rain, the streets, the envelope, the letters, and every small twist of fate that had brought us to this precise instant. And I smiled through tears, because sometimes love was quiet, sometimes it was patient, and sometimes it arrived in moments of revelation and courage. And we laughed softly together, a mixture of relief and joy, and he brushed a wet strand of hair from my face, eyes shining, and said, no more secrets, no more waiting. Just us. And I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me that I had longed for years, and I turned slightly, glancing toward the car where my son waved excitedly, and in that instant, I realized that life had given me back not just the man I loved, but the chance to show my son what love could endure, and I took a deep breath, letting the past fall away, embracing the present fully. And then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small origami crane, delicate and folded perfectly, and handed it to me with a smile, saying simply, "For all the days we thought we lost but never really did." And I held it tightly, feeling its significance, the symbol of hope, love, and continuity, and we walked together toward the car, hands still intertwined, hearts lighter yet full of everything we had survived, and as we reached my son, I felt a profound sense of completeness, a moment of perfect alignment, where the past, present, and future merged, and I realized that sometimes love returned not with grand declarations or perfect timing, but with honesty, courage, and a willingness to be present. And in that moment, standing with him and my son, the rain now just a memory, the city alive around us, I understood fully that love could endure, could heal, and could rebuild. And I looked at him, eyes meeting his, heart open, and whispered, "We are home." And he smiled, pulling me close again, the crane in my hand fluttering slightly, and in that final embrace, I knew that this story, our story, had found its true beginning, and the weight of the years in the silence was replaced with the certainty that no matter what came next, love had returned, patient, enduring, and real.